In the winter of 1833, Delaware lay under a silence so heavy it felt unnatural. Snow blanketed the earth like a shroud, muffling every sound except the whisper of the wind as it slithered through the skeletal trees. The night sky held no stars, only a hollow blackness, and those who stepped outside swore they felt watched by something not of this world. On the edge of town, there stood a house. Timber walls warped by age, windows clouded with frost, chimney smoke that carried a scent both sweet and sour, like rot hiding beneath perfume. Inside lived a woman whom the villagers called the widow, though her husband had died years earlier. Some said her grief had turned her mad. Others said madness had chosen her long before love or loss ever touched her life. The widow was not spoken of in daylight. Her presence belonged to the night, to the hours when silence was thickest and the air itself seemed afraid. Neighbors reported seeing candlelight flicker in her parlor at ungodly hours. They claimed they heard her singing, not with sorrow, but with a tenderness so haunting it chilled the marrow. No one knew whom she sang to, or what. But the truth would soon reveal itself, and once it did, Delaware would never be the same. Imagine this. Villagers trudging through snow on their way to church at dawn, pausing as the faint strains of the widow's voice floated through the brittle air. They leaned toward the sound, listening closely. The melody wasn't broken or weeping. It was loving. It was gentle. And that was what terrified them most. For love, when it feeds on death, is no longer love. It is hunger disguised in silk. The townspeople whispered, but none dared confront her. Fear has a way of silencing entire communities, forcing them to live as accomplices to horrors they cannot name. Yet fate does not allow secrets to remain buried forever. Soon, one curious soul would draw close to the widow's door. And in that moment, the veil between life and death would rip open. The world would glimpse what it should never have seen. But before we step deeper into her story, before we descend into the widow's darkness, I want to know something about you. Yes, you, the one listening now. Tell me in the comments below which city and what time you are listening to us from, so we know exactly who is absorbing this secret tonight. Delaware in 1833 was a land of contradictions, fields rich with harvest yet haunted by whispers of famine, towns proud of their churches yet trembling with unspoken sins. Families rose before dawn to till frozen soil, their breaths clouding in the cold morning air, while at night they huddled by hearth fires, clutching their children close as if the darkness itself were hungry. Religion was law, but fear was its twin, and every sermon carried not only the promise of salvation, but the shadow of damnation. It was a time when people feared witches more than thieves, and whispers carried the weight of verdicts. On the surface, life looked orderly. Men carried tobacco to market, women baked bread in clay ovens, children chased one another through snow. But in every town, beneath every layer of civility, there was rot. Secrets festered behind locked doors, families hid sickness like sin, and superstition lived in every breath. People spoke of curses, of omens in the flight of birds, of shadows moving in empty barns, and in Delaware, one shadow grew heavier than all the rest, the widow's house. Her dwelling stood apart from the village, not by distance but by presence. Travelers passing by felt compelled to quicken their steps, as if an unseen hand pressed them forward. Neighbors avoided looking directly at it. The windows seemed too dark, the air around it too still, as if even wind avoided its touch. Yet every so often in the depth of night, villagers swore they saw silhouettes through the curtains, figures that should not have been there, moving gently as though they were being caressed. Rumors spread like frost over glass. Some said she spoke to her dead husband nightly, his shadow pacing the room while she crooned to him like a child. Others whispered she lured stray men inside, their voices heard in laughter one night and silenced forever the next. The church declared her a woman consumed by grief, but the villagers knew better. Her grief was not mourning, it was hunger, and hunger, when left unchecked, finds its feast. The widow was never seen at market, never seen in prayer. She lived in separation, But she was never truly alone. No one dared to enter, but all felt the pulse of something within. And the truth? The truth was drawing closer, like footsteps in the snow that lead straight to a locked cellar door. And if you feel ready to take the next step and become part of this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The widow's true name was Margaret Elwell. A woman of 40 winters, her face bore the quiet dignity of sorrow, yet her eyes concealed something deeper, something unspeakable. She had once been the pride of her family, a bride in a pale blue gown who stood at the altar with a smile so radiant it silenced the pews. Her husband Thomas was a farmer of good reputation, a man who tilled the earth with broad hands and spoke few words. For years they lived as others did, quietly, humbly, with the simple rhythm of work and prayer. But happiness, like all fragile things, shatters too easily. When Thomas fell ill, it was swift. The sickness came in fever and sweat, in coughing fits that rattled his chest like chains. The local doctor said it was consumption. Neighbors whispered that it was a curse. Margaret stayed at his side until the end, singing lullabies she had once reserved for children she never bore. When he died, she did not weep, not a tear. Instead, she closed his eyes with a tenderness that made even the undertaker uneasy. They said her face did not look like grief. It looked like devotion. Devotion too deep, too unbroken, too unnatural. From that day, Margaret changed. She stopped attending church. She rarely left her home. Those who glimpsed her in the street said she walked as if carrying invisible weight, her gaze fixed on the ground, lips moving in whispers no one could hear. And though death had stolen her husband, some swore they still heard her voice at night, softly singing as if he lay still beside her. What unsettled the villagers most was how she lingered in the graveyard. For hours she would sit by his burial mound, brushing snow from the earth, speaking in hushed tones as if waiting for a reply. When confronted, she would smile faintly and say, "He hears me. He always hears me." The word struck terror, for in that age, communion with the dead was no trivial matter. It was blasphemy, a dangerous invitation to forces no mortal should court. And yet, Margaret was not shunned entirely. Some pitied her, saying grief had broken her mind. Others feared her, believing she had opened her heart to powers older and darker than the church dared name. But what no one knew then was this: her love had not ended with death, it had only deepened, and soon others, living souls, would become part of her devotion. The first whispers began with the disappearance of small things. A neighbor's scarf left drying on a fence vanished overnight. A pair of shoes set on a doorstep was gone by morning. Chickens went missing from their pens, dogs from their yards. At first, the villagers blamed wandering thieves or the harsh hunger of winter. But one detail unsettled them all. Every trail of footprints ended at the edge of the widow's property, and there they stopped as if the earth itself had swallowed them whole. Soon it was no longer objects. It was people. A young farmhand, no more than 70, he was last seen walking home after dusk. His boots left marks in the snow clear as scripture until the prints curved near the widow's lane. From there, nothing. He was never seen again. His family searched the woods, the fields, the frozen streams, but the land gave no answer, only silence. And yet that same night, villagers reported hearing the faint strains of a song drifting across the snow. Margaret's voice, soft, sweet, as though she were comforting someone in her parlor. But how could that be when no one had seen her open her door? The doctor was called, urged to check on her. He returned pale, insisting she was in good health, though his eyes refused to meet anyone's. When pressed, he muttered only one thing: "Her house is warm, too warm." And with that, he refused to speak further. Stranger still, the church bells began to toll at unusual hours, as though rung by unseen hands. Children claimed they saw figures in the widow's windows, standing motionless, staring outward, and when asked to describe them, the children grew silent, refusing to speak. It was then that a seamstress swore she recognized the missing farmhand's coat hanging in the widow's hallway when she passed by, but when men of the town demanded proof, she faltered, unable to repeat what she'd seen. Fear, it seemed, had its claws in every throat. And through it all, Margaret carried on with her silence and her song. She never appeared distressed, never begged for mercy, never defended herself. She merely watched, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark, as if the accusations meant nothing, because she had already chosen her truth. The village wanted to believe this was grief, but grief does not steal the living. Grief does not leave the sound of chains echoing faintly in the night. The breaking point came on a night of bitter wind, when the town's suspicions swelled beyond silence. A search party was gathered, farmers with lanterns, hunters with rifles, and the sheriff himself gripping a rusted key he had sworn never to use. They trudged toward Margaret Elwell's house, their boots crunching in the snow like the slow beat of a funeral march. Each man carried more than fear. He carried shame, for they all knew they had waited too long. Too many faces had gone missing. Too many families wept at empty tables. Tonight, they would confront what they had allowed to fester. The house loomed, its shutters rattling against the storm. No candle burned in the windows, yet smoke drifted from the chimney, carrying that same sweet, nauseating scent. The smell of roses mingled with something metallic, something that clung to the back of the throat. They knocked. No answer. They shouted her name. Silence. At last, the sheriff placed the key to the lock, but the door creaked open before he turned it, as though the house itself had been expecting them. Inside, the air was thick, heavy curtains suffocated the light, and yet the room glowed with the warmth of many candles. The parlor was filled with flowers, vases overflowing with wilting petals, their perfume sharp enough to sting the eyes. And there, upon chairs in corners against the wall, sat figures, still, upright, draped in Sunday clothes, faces pale as wax, lips drained of color. The missing. Gasps broke from the men, some dropping their lanterns, others crossing themselves in frantic prayer. The bodies were not rotting. They were preserved, as if some cruel hand had halted time, and on each lifeless face a faint smile lingered, as though death had brought not terror, but peace. At the center of the room, Margaret sat in her rocking chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes glistened as she looked upon her visitors, not with guilt, but with a serenity that burned colder than any winter wind. "They are not lost," she whispered, her voice tender, motherly, almost soothing. "They are loved, more than they ever were in life." One man retched, another fled screaming. The sheriff, his hands trembling, raised his pistol, but the widow did not move. She simply turned her gaze back to the still bodies surrounding her, rocking gently, humming that same lullaby as if to cradle her collection of beloved dead. The discovery shattered the town like a mirror struck with a hammer. Word spread before dawn, carried in whispers so frantic they cracked the silence of every home. Mothers clutched their children tighter, fathers locked their doors, and the church bells tolled long into the morning, not as a call to prayer, but as a warning. Delaware had been touched by something unholy. Margaret Elwell was seized that night, her wrists bound with rope, though she did not resist. She walked calmly between the men, her gaze fixed on the snow, as though listening for voices only she could hear. Behind them, others wrapped the lifeless bodies in sheets, laying them out in the churchyard until families could identify them. It was said some mothers fainted at the sight, not from grief alone, but from the uncanny stillness of the corpses, like porcelain dolls who might open their eyes at any moment. The sheriff's report was brief, but the details dripped with horror. Chains fastened discreetly behind doors, jars of strange herbs and powders lining the shelves, a cellar floor stained dark, its stench masked by endless vases of flowers. The coroner examined the bodies and claimed no signs of torture, no wounds of violence. He shook his head and muttered one phrase that chilled even the hardest men. They were not killed by force. They were kept. The trial became spectacle. Crowds gathered from neighboring towns, desperate to catch a glimpse of the woman who had turned grief into devotion, devotion into blasphemy. Some demanded she be burned, like a witch of old. Others insisted she was insane, a victim of a broken mind. Yet when asked to explain her actions, Margaret spoke with clarity. She said she had not murdered them but saved them. She had preserved them from a world that wasted love, from families who would never cherish them as she did. Her words unsettled the court, for there was no madness in her tone, no frenzy in her eyes, only calm, only conviction. And though the jury declared her guilty, though the sentence was written in ink and fire, the people of Delaware carried away a heavier burden, the knowledge that someone among them had chosen to love death more than life, and in that choice had found peace. But peace for one can become a curse for all. They say Margaret Elwell was hanged at dawn, her body swaying against the pale sky while the crowd watched in silence. The rope creaked, the wind moaned, and some swore the widow smiled with her last breath. Others claimed they heard her humming the same lullaby, faint and trembling, until the sound was swallowed by the gallows. The authorities buried her outside consecrated ground far from the village cemetery so her soul could not mingle with the faithful dead. Yet no grave marker was placed and no priest offered words. The earth closed over her like a wound, unblessed, unfinished. But death does not erase what has been done. Death often amplifies it. The widow's house stood for years after her execution, empty, untouched. Families avoided the road that passed by it. Travelers reported seeing candlelight in the windows, even though the place had long been boarded. Children dared each other to knock on the door, but few returned without tears. Some swore they heard voices, soft and loving, as though a gathering of people spoke from beyond the walls, always gentle, always wrong. Time moved forward, yet the story refused to rot. Newspapers buried it, churches dismissed it, but whispers lived on. Generations retold the tale by firelight, each version darker than the last. And with every retelling, one truth gnawed at the edges of belief. Margaret Elwell had loved her victims more in death than their families had loved them in life. Was this madness? Or was it a mirror, a reflection of the hidden hunger in every human soul to control, to keep, to possess what we fear losing? You see, what makes her story unbearable is not its distance from us, but its closeness. She was not a monster born of legend. She was a woman of flesh and blood, of grief and longing. Her descent into forbidden love for the dead did not erupt overnight. It grew like a vine in silence, fed by sorrow, by isolation, by secrets. And perhaps that is why her shadow lingers still, because she showed us a truth we are not willing to face. Sometimes it is not hatred that corrupts the human heart, it is love twisted beyond recognition. So I ask you this, listener, when you think of Margaret, do you shudder because she was inhuman, or because she was human, just like you? The choice to answer may haunt you more than the question itself. Margaret Elwell's story was not buried by accident, it was buried by design. You see, whenever history confronts us with something too dangerous, too revealing, the institutions rush to smother it beneath layers of silence. The newspapers of 1833 printed only fragments of her trial. The church whispered her name only as a cautionary tale. The authorities sealed their records. Why? Because Margaret's crime exposed a truth they could not allow the common man to see, that love itself, when untethered from the rules of society, becomes more powerful than law, than faith, than order. The men who ruled Delaware could not admit that devotion, pure and obsessive, was capable of dismantling the pillars of control. To them, Margaret was not simply a criminal, she was a threat to the architecture of obedience. If her story had spread in its raw form, people might have asked questions the elite could not answer. Why do we trust those who govern grief? Why does the church own the definition of love and sin? And most dangerous of all, what is the line between prayer to the dead and communion with them? So they silenced it. They scrubbed it. They replaced it with tales of witches and demons, always pushing the idea that evil is something external, something monstrous, never something born in the human heart. But Margaret revealed the opposite. She showed that institutions cannot protect you from the corruption within, that their walls of doctrine are thin paper against the storm of desire. And tell me, Do you believe this was the only case? The only woman, the only soul who turned death into intimacy? No, history is littered with them. Men who drank blood in the name of medicine, families who slept beside their mummified children to avoid loss, kings who had their lovers embalmed and kept in their chambers for years. But these stories are scattered, censored, hidden away because they erode the illusion of normality. They reveal that beneath the polished surface of civilization, the human species has always carried a hunger for what should remain untouchable. Margaret was not an exception. She was a fracture, and through that fracture, if you look closely, you can glimpse the machinery that governs us all, the endless effort to control what we feel, what we fear, and what we dare to love. Do you understand now, student, why her name was erased? Margaret's shadow is dangerous not because of what she did, but because of what she revealed. The greatest threat to the powers that rule this world is not violence, it is the human heart freed from their grip. When a woman can claim ownership of death itself, when she can redefine love beyond the boundaries of the church, she undermines the very spine of control. And those who sit on thrones, whether political, religious, or scientific, cannot allow that. Think of it. Institutions survive only by dictating what grief should look like, how love should be expressed, and how death should be mourned. Step outside those rituals, and you are branded a heretic, a lunatic, a monster. Margaret I'd not kill with rage. She preserved with tenderness. And in doing so, she proved that intimacy can exist outside the rules of priests and lawmakers. That alone was enough to terrify them. For if one woman could do it, what would stop others from shattering the rituals of control? You see, the manipulation runs deeper than you think. Cemeteries, funerals, last rites, these are not simply traditions. They are systems designed to channel your grief into obedient patterns. They dictate how you remember, how you let go, how you surrender your dead to the state and the church. But Margaret refused. She did not let go. She did not surrender. She kept what she loved, even if it meant breaking the laws of nature itself. And so they silenced her. They turned her story into a warning rather than a revelation. They told you she was mad because admitting otherwise would expose the truth. She was free. But ask yourself, how many other truths have been buried under the same weight of silence? How many times have those in power rewritten the story, twisting it into something safe? When you hear of witches burned, were they truly cursed, or did they simply refuse to conform? When you read of criminals condemned, were they truly evil? Or did they threaten the fragile cages society builds around every soul? Margaret Elwell was not just a widow who loved her victims more in death, she was a crack in the foundation. And through that crack, if you dare to look, you will see how thin the walls of this world truly are. Margaret's story is but a fragment, a single thread pulled loose from a vast and rotting tapestry. Once you see it, you begin to notice the pattern, how institutions bury, distort, and poison memory itself. What happened in Delaware was not isolated. It was part of a cycle older than nations, older than kings. And if you have the courage to look deeper, you will see that the same hands that silenced her are the same hands that have shaped the history you were taught to worship. Think of ancient Rome, where emperors decreed which gods were real and which were heresy. The ink of the Middle Ages, when the church rewrote pagan rituals into Christian festivals, erasing the memory of entire cultures while smiling in the name of salvation. Think of the so-called Age of Enlightenment, when secret societies gathered behind closed doors, trading truths in whispers while the public was spoon-fed lies of progress and order. Do you see the pattern now? The truth is never destroyed. It is hidden. It is twisted. It is locked away until the people forget why it mattered. And behind every silencing, there is fear. The rulers fear you more than they fear their enemies. They fear what you might become if you discovered the power that grief, love, and death truly hold when they are not mediated by the state, the church, or the crown. Margaret's defiance was not political, yet it threatened politics. Her love was not religious, yet it threatened religion. Her preservation of the dead was not scientific, yet it threatened medicine. She tore down their walls without lifting a weapon. That is why they crushed her. But here is the darker truth. They did not erase her to protect you. They erased her to protect themselves. Because once you recognize that all institutions, from priesthoods to parliaments, survive by scripting your emotions, you begin to ask the forbidden question: what if the rituals of power are nothing more than cages? When you bury your dead according to their rites, you obey. When you grieve according to their timetable, you obey. When you love only within their sanctioned borders, you obey. Margaret stopped obeying, and in doing so she revealed the chains that bind us all. Now tell me, do you think those chains are gone? Or do you feel them tightening century after century, disguised as progress? You may think, student, that chains are forged from iron, but the strongest chains are invisible. They are wrapped around your thoughts, your rituals, your very perception of reality. Margaret's defiance was not simply an act of madness, it was a rejection of those invisible bindings, and the reason her story was buried is because it exposed the machinery of control that governs every one of us. Consider grief. They tell you when to cry, when to stop, and how long to wear black before you must smile again. They control not only the death of your loved ones, but the death of your emotions. Consider love. They script it into vows, contracts, laws, ensuring that even your most intimate devotion is documented, taxed, sanctioned. Consider death itself. You are not permitted to face it on your own terms. The state dictates when you may die, how your body is handled, who profits from your departure. In every stage of existence, from cradle to coffin, the system teaches you obedience through ritual. And yet, all around us, cracks appear. People whisper to their dead, refusing to let go. Lovers bind themselves without priests. Thinkers question the narratives carved into their textbooks. These are sparks of rebellion against the silent empire of psychological control. But do you know what happens when a spark becomes a flame? It is smothered, buried, forgotten, just as Margaret was. You are told this is for your safety, but is it? Or is it because once you realize you can shape your own grief, your own love, your own death, you are free, and a free man cannot be ruled? Look closer, and you will see how these invisible chains tighten even today. Media dictates which tragedies you should mourn. Governments dictate who deserves your compassion and who deserves your silence. Corporations dictate what love should look like, selling you rings, ceremonies, and fleeting illusions. Every thought that feels natural has been engineered. Every ritual that feels ancient has been edited. Every truth you cling to has been processed through the machinery of control. And here is the secret they never wanted you to hear. The most dangerous prison is not the one built around your body. It is the one built inside your mind. When you begin to see the prison of the mind, you start to notice the gaps, the fragments of forbidden knowledge scattered like bones beneath the floorboards of history. They are there if you know where to look, but most are trained not to see, and that is no accident. Suppression is an art mastered over centuries. The rulers of this world do not destroy truth outright. They distort it, dilute it, bury it beneath 1,000 lies until you no longer recognize it when it stands before you. Take ancient rites of the dead. Once, families sat with their loved ones for days, speaking to them, touching them, keeping them close until the final breath of farewell was chosen by the living, not dictated by an institution. But this practice was outlawed, called unclean, called dangerous. Why? Because it granted power to the people. It gave them intimacy with death, control over the sacred transition. That intimacy had to be stolen, replaced with priests, doctors, undertakers, gatekeepers who stood between you and the reality of mortality. Take knowledge of the human mind. Long before psychology was invented, tribes and mystics understood how dreams, symbols, and visions shaped behavior. But instead of allowing you to use this knowledge freely, it was seized, systematized, turned into sciences of control, used by rulers, generals, and corporations to bend populations like reeds in the wind. What once was medicine for the soul became a weapon for power. Take love itself. In older worlds it was raw, unbound, sacred. But soon it was shackled by contracts, dowries, taxes, rules of inheritance. The elite transformed intimacy into property, and so your emotions, your deepest longings, became resources harvested for the empire. Margaret Elwell was but one crack in this system, one widow who refused to surrender her devotion to the rituals of control. She kept her dead. He loved them past the grave, and though they called it madness, though they buried her name, she was proof that the machinery could be defied. That is why they feared her. That is why they fear anyone who dares to look behind the curtain. Understand this: every forbidden story you uncover, every silenced truth you touch, does not weaken you, it transforms you. But transformation comes with danger, because once you see the world as it is, you can never return to the comfort of blindness. Corruption, student, is not a modern disease. It is the bloodstream of civilization itself. Every empire, every church, every government has been built not on truth, but on the careful engineering of illusions. The masses are given rituals, stories, and laws to keep them docile, while behind closed doors, the elite feed on the very forces they forbid you to touch. Do you think the priests who condemned Margaret did not have their own secret chambers? Do you think the kings who outlawed communion with the dead did not hire alchemists, necromancers, and mediums to whisper beyond the veil for their advantage? The pattern is as old as history. What they call sin in your hands becomes sacred in theirs. What they burn you for, they practice in shadow. Look back to Egypt, where pharaohs declared that only their bodies would be preserved for eternity, while the common man was left to rot. Look to Babylon, where temple rites disguised blood rituals for power, all while peasants were forbidden from even touching sacred objects. Look to Rome, where emperors drank from the chalices of forbidden cults, while condemning ordinary citizens to torture for the same practices. And in every age the people bowed, believing the lie that holiness belonged only to the throne. The truth is this: the elite have always manipulated death, love, and grief as weapons. They tell you to surrender your dead so they may sell you funerals. They tell you to surrender your grief so they may keep your labor productive. They tell you to surrender your love so they may license it, tax it, record it. And when one of you, just one, dares to break that order, they descend with fire, with rope, with silence. Margaret was their victim not because she harmed, but because she exposed. The corruption is not in the act of loving the dead, it is in the institutions that claim the right to define what love must be. The corruption is not in the hunger for power, it is in the hands that hoard it while punishing you for desiring the same. Ask yourself this, listener: if the same men who condemned Margaret practiced the very arts they denied her, then who truly was insane? The widow in her rocking chair, or the rulers who still to this day whisper with death while forbidding you the same freedom? Do not make the mistake of believing that corruption belongs only to the past. No, student, it has only refined itself, becoming quieter, more polished, more invisible. What was once done with chains and fire is now done with laws, screens, and contracts. The institutions no longer need to hang a woman like Margaret to silence her. They only need to erase her from the records, bury her beneath textbooks, and drown her in the noise of 1,000 meaningless stories. Look around you. Do you think the control has loosened? It has grown stronger. The rituals have only changed form. You are told how to grieve through television broadcasts that dictate which tragedies deserve your tears. You are told how to love through films, songs, and advertisements that sell you the illusion of intimacy, polished and profitable. You are told how to die through hospitals that drain your wealth in the final days of your life, turning death into an industry more lucrative than gold. Consider how news cycles command your emotions. One day you are instructed to mourn a celebrity you never knew. The next you are ordered to fear a foreign enemy whose face you will never see. Do you see the pattern? Your grief, your fear, your love, they are harvested, processed, and redirected like water through canals, and every drop feeds the machinery of control. The technology you cradle in your hands, glowing in the dark, is the new pulpit, the new courtroom, the new gallows. Through it, they do not burn you, they program you, Algorithms shape what you desire. Trends dictate what you mourn. Social rituals are written by invisible code and you obey without even realizing it. Margaret's rocking chair has been replaced by the endless scroll, and instead of a small village watching one woman with suspicion, an empire of watchers stares into every home. And yet the hunger is the same. Institutions fear nothing more than the individual who dares to step outside the script, the man who grieves too long, the woman who loves beyond permission, the soul who whispers to the dead without priest or doctor to mediate. These are the modern heretics, and though their fires burn on screens instead of pyres, the silencing is just as complete. Understand this, the system has not ended, it has only become more elegant, and if you are not careful, your very thoughts will belong to them before you even realize they were stolen. Student, now we cross a threshold. Until now, you have seen corruption, manipulation, and suppression. But what lies deeper is not merely control, it is warfare. And the battlefield is not the land, nor the sea, nor the skies. It is the mind. Every generation has been trained to believe they are free while marching in chains. But the truth is this: you are living inside a war zone designed to shape your very identity. The tools are subtle, almost invisible. Language itself is one of their weapons. Words are not neutral. They are engineered to shape the boundaries of thought. When they define grief as an illness, they pathologize your love for the dead. When they label rebellion as madness, they isolate the visionary and cage the prophet. When they call obedience civility, they chain entire populations with a single phrase. The battlefield is not one with guns, it is one with definitions. Symbols too are turned into weapons. The cross, the flag, the crown, all once carried meaning, but now they are deployed as triggers. You kneel, salute, pledge, and pray not because you choose, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to obey. Even your silence can be commanded. Even your gaze can be directed. This is warfare waged without a single bullet, and yet it kills the most important thing you possess, your ability to see truth. Do you wonder why Margaret terrified them so deeply? Because she refused to play the role assigned to her. She redefined death not as an end, but as an intimacy. She turned mourning into devotion, grief into ritual, silence into conversation. She became immune to the definitions imposed upon her, and that made her more dangerous than any soldier. She was fighting the very war they hoped you would never recognize. This, student, is the hidden war. It is why certain stories vanish from history. It is why certain books are burned. It is why certain people are silenced, not because they wield weapons of steel, but because they wield weapons of perception. If you hear nothing else in this journey, hear this. The war for your soul is not fought outside your door, it is fought inside your head. And every moment you live without questioning, you lose another battle you never even knew was being fought. Now, if you have followed me this far, write this phrase twice in the comments. The chains are in the mind. Write it to seal your transformation. Write it to tell the algorithm that you are no longer asleep. Now that you have marked yourself with the phrase, student, you can no longer pretend ignorance. You are awake, and once awake, the world reveals itself for what it truly is, a machine of conditioning disguised as culture. Propaganda is not the crude posters of wartime or the black and white reels of dictators shouting into crowds. No, propaganda today is far more elegant, far more poisonous. It wears the mask of entertainment, of education, of convenience. It whispers, not shouts. It seduces, not commands. Consider your daily rituals, the news you consume, the songs you repeat, the stories you binge-watch. Each is engineered to press upon your emotions, to direct your fears, to script your desires. When the screen tells you who the enemy is, you obey with anger. When the film tells you what love should look like, you obey with longing. When the advertisement tells you what success is, you obey with envy. You believe you are choosing, but in truth, the choices have already been written. The conditioning begins when you are a child. Stories are fed to you before you can question. Heroes and villains are arranged not to reveal truth but to normalize obedience. You are told which gods are real and which are fantasy. You are told which wars are noble and which are savage. You are told which rulers were saviors and which were monsters. But notice this. Every story you are given ends with the same command: trust the authority, doubt yourself. This is why Margaret's case was erased, not because she was the first widow to weep for her dead, but because she dared to write her own story outside of their approved scripts. She turned grief into rebellion. She loved beyond permission. She spoke to the forbidden. Her existence was an act of propaganda in reverse, one woman showing others that the rituals imposed upon them were not laws, but cages. That realization, if spread, would collapse the machine. Understand this. Propaganda does not merely tell you what to think, it tells you what is unthinkable, and by drawing the borders of thought itself, it controls not just your actions, but your very soul. And so I ask you, listener, how much of what you believe is yours, and how much was written for you long before you could even speak? Student, now we come to the Trinity of Contro, or the three pillars that hold up every empire, every kingdom, every republic: fear, religion, law. These are not separate forces, but interlocking gears of the same machine. Together they build a prison so vast, so invisible, that most men live and die within it, without ever realizing the walls were not real. Fear is the first and strongest. Fear of pain, fear of death, fear of exile. They show you the stake, the noose, the prison cell, not always to use them, but to remind you that disobedience has a price. You are told that to question is dangerous, to resist is madness, to rebel is suicide. Fear is the leash around your throat, tightened every time you take a step away from the path they demand. Margaret was held by this leash too, but she chewed through it, and that made her untamable. Religion is the second pillar. Not faith, no. Faith is the flame within the human spirit. Religion, as shaped by institutions, is that flame trapped in a lantern and chained to the altar of power. It tells you not only what to believe, but how to believe it, when to bow, when to rise, what words to repeat. The promise of heaven becomes a tool of obedience. The threat of hell becomes a whip across your back. It is no coincidence that those who silenced Margaret were men of the cloth, men who feared not her sin, but her freedom from their authority. And then comes law, the cold mask of authority. Law pretends to be neutral, but it is the most obedient servant of power. It sanctifies fear, it codifies religion, it transforms obedience into duty. Law does not ask whether an act is moral, only whether it is permitted. They will tell you it is illegal to speak with your dead, illegal to question the crown, illegal to step beyond the boundaries they have drawn, and the man who obeys law without question becomes a soldier for the very system that chains him. Do you see it now? These three are not protectors of society, they are the architects of obedience. They do not defend truth, they defend control, and the moment Margaret defied them, she became their enemy. Not because she was wrong, but because she was free. Student, if fear, religion, and law bind your body, then memory is the chain that binds your soul. What is history if not memory written by the victors? What is memory if not a battlefield where truth and lies wrestle until only the useful remains? You are not living in a world of facts. You are living in a world of edited recollections, and those who control memory control reality itself. Consider how the past is presented to you. Do you truly believe the textbooks? Do you truly believe the headlines, the portraits of smiling leaders, the heroic statues that stand in your city squares? Each page, each carving, each monument is not a reflection of truth. It is a weapon. What you are taught to honor is chosen carefully. What you are told to forget is buried deliberately. Margaret's story was not lost. It was erased. Ask yourself, how many lives, how many rebellions, how many acts of courage have been deleted so that only the tales of obedience remain? You hear of kings and generals, but not the peasants who resisted them. You hear of saints and martyrs approved by the church, but not the countless souls burned as heretics, many of whom carried wisdom more dangerous and more true than their persecutors ever admitted. History is not memory. It is propaganda carved into stone. Even your personal memory is vulnerable. Institutions know this. They know that if they repeat a lie often enough, you will recall it as truth. They know that if they suppress a fact long enough, it will vanish from your mind like smoke. Studies show that memory can be reshaped, overwritten, stolen. Imagine what centuries of systematic manipulation can do to entire civilizations. Imagine how many truths you hold in your heart that were never yours at all. Margaret is proof of this theft. Her story survives only in whispers, fragments, scattered across letters and old journals hidden in attics. Official records declare her insane. Newspapers of the time erased her name. She exists not because they preserved her, but because fragments slipped through their fingers. And it is in these fragments, these cracks in the wall, that truth leaks out. Remember this: your memory is not yours. It is sculpted, polished, reshaped by forces far older and far darker than you realize. And unless you guard it, unless you question it, you will die believing lies that were never yours to begin with. Student, now you must understand the most insidious weapon of all: symbols and language. If memory is the battlefield, then words are the swords, and symbols the banners under which entire civilizations march blindly to their doom. Words can wound deeper than steel, and symbols can command obedience more effectively than armies. The rulers of history have always known this. That is why they spend more energy shaping what you say and what you see than what you do. Think of the cross. To some, it is salvation. To others, it is conquest. Armies marched under it, slaughtering in the name of love. Think of the flag. A piece of fabric, yet millions will kill or die for it, never questioning who stitched its colors and why. Think of crowns, thrones, seals, all empty objects, yet infused with invisible authority that bends millions to their knees. Do you see? The power is not in the object, it is in the meaning programmed into you. Language itself is a cage. The words you are allowed to use determine the thoughts you are able to think. They tell you some words are profane, others sacred. They remove certain phrases from your tongue, knowing that if you cannot speak them, you cannot conceive them. Even the way you structure sentences, the way you divide time, the way you describe emotion, has been engineered to keep you obedient. This is why, and sometimes, scient languages vanish. This is why new words appear in your mouth, born not from your people, but from institutions that drip-feed you vocabulary like chains disguised as poetry. Margaret's rebellion was linguistic as well as spiritual. She spoke to her dead in ways the church had outlawed. She used rituals that authorities declared blasphemous. Her very words were crimes. Why? Because she dared to describe death differently. And the moment you name something outside of their script, you create freedom. You give birth to a world they cannot control. Look around you today. Slogans shouted in unison, hashtags repeated like prayers, symbols branded into your mind until they feel eternal. Yet all of them were designed, chosen, and sold. You believe they are yours, but they were never yours. This is the true weapon, student. They do not need to chain your hands if they can chain your tongue. They do not need to imprison your body if they can imprison your thoughts. And most men will never even realize they are prisoners at all. Student, now we approach the chamber where the air itself grows heavy, the place where fear and silence have always met. For beneath the symbols, beneath the laws, beneath the language, lies the most ancient fuel of power: blood. No empire has ever risen without it. No throne has ever stood without sacrifice. And though they wrap it in ceremony, though they dress it in prayers and uniforms, the truth remains. Power drinks from the veins of the people. In the old world, the rituals were open. Aztec pyramids ran red with hearts torn from the chests of captives, their blood offered to the gods who were in truth nothing but masks for rulers who demanded submission. In Babylon, infants vanished into fire, while priests declared it holy. In Rome, gladiators slaughtered one another for the pleasure of emperors who pretended it was entertainment, but in reality, it was ritualized sacrifice, fear and death feeding the empire. You believe such things belong to the past? No, they have only grown more subtle. War itself is the modern needs. Sacrifice, dressed in flags instead of robes, waged not only for land, but for the blood it spills. Millions of young men sent to die, their deaths sanctified by speeches, their bodies laid in rows like offerings upon an altar of steel. The rituals remain, only the names change. Margaret understood this on a scale that horrified her neighbors. She loved the dead not with fear, but with devotion. She gave to them what society demanded she give to priests and rulers. Her home became her temple. Her whispers became her scripture. She inverted the order, refusing to allow power to consume her grief. In loving her dead, she denied the machine its fuel. That, student, was her true crime. Today, the rituals are quieter but no less present. Insurance policies, hospital contracts, military ceremonies, all of them siphon the sacred act of dying into a system that profits. Sacrifice is still demanded of you, but instead of altars, it is disguised as patriotism, duty, progress, and you bow, believing it holy. Ask yourself, how many deaths are truly necessary, and how many are demanded by the ancient hunger that feeds on suffering? The rulers of this world still require blood, still require grief, still require ritual, and until you see it, you will march to their altar willingly, believing you have chosen the path yourself. Student, let us strip away the veil once more. Death, the most sacred of thresholds, has been stolen from you. Once, it belonged to families, to tribes, to the soil itself. The dead were buried by their kin, remembered through song, carried in memory as living presences. But power saw an opportunity and seized it. Death became not a mystery but a commodity, a business, a weapon. Consider the modern funeral. What should be an intimate passage is now an industry worth billions, coffins polished like thrones, embalming fluids pumped into corpses so the illusion of peace can be sold for a price. Your grief is not honored, it is monetized. You are told what casket to buy, what flowers to display, how long to mourn before returning to work. Even the silence of your heart is taxed. And beyond the marketplace of funerals lies a darker truth. Death itself is wielded as a tool of control. Insurance companies profit from your fear of dying too soon. Pharmaceutical empires profit from your fear of dying too late. Militaries profit from orchestrating death on a scale that defies comprehension. Every institution that claims to protect you feeds upon your mortality. The very thing that should connect you to eternity has been weaponized to bind you to contracts, to debts, to obedience. Do you see the genius of it? They take what no man can avoid, the inevitability of death, and turn it into an endless stream of power. You are taught to fear it, to buy against it, to plan around it, to submit to those who claim they can soften its blow. And in the end, you die not as a free soul but as a product, consumed to the last breath by systems that never loved you. Margaret, in her defiance, exposed this theft. She refused to hand over her dead to undertakers or priests. She kept them close, whispering to them, honoring them on her own terms. That act was more than rebellion, it was liberation. She reclaimed death as sacred, not commercial, and that, student, is why she was silenced. She showed the villagers that grief could be free, that death could still belong to the living. Now ask yourself, who owns your death? Is it yours, or has it already been sold, packaged, and scheduled by powers you cannot see? Until you reclaim it, you will never truly live. Student, you must now face the most intimate of prisons, the fear of your own mortality. For what greater chain could exist than the terror of your own ending? Institutions understood long ago that if they could twist death into a horror, they could govern every moment of your life, and so they built their empires not upon not upon truth, but upon your fear of the inevitable. Consider how early this fear is planted. A child hears stories of hellfire before he even knows what fire is. A daughter is warned of ghosts before she can name the stars. Death is introduced not as a mystery to be embraced, but as a curse to be avoided at all costs. The lesson is clear: obey the rules, cling to authority, or face an eternity of torment. This is not faith. This is programming. The fear becomes profitable. Entire industries exist because men are desperate to delay the grave. Pills, procedures, surgeries, machines that keep the heart beating long after the spirit has fled. They do not sell you life. They sell you the illusion of postponement. And you pay again and again to escape what no man can escape. The fear becomes political. Leaders rise not by promising peace, but by promising protection from death. Foreign threats, invisible diseases, abstract dangers, all conjured to keep you clinging to the savior in the high chair. You vote not for freedom, but for safety. You trade your sovereignty for the illusion that someone can shield you from the one truth that shadows all men. But here is the unspoken secret: those who master their fear of death cannot be ruled. What can the whip threaten? What can the prison promise? What can the executioner achieve against a man who welcomes the end as he welcomes the dawn? Margaret, in her grim devotion, discovered this power. She loved death so fiercely that it no longer frightened her. And a woman, unafraid of death, is more dangerous than any army. This is why her neighbors trembled. Not because she whispered to corpses, but because she revealed the lie, that death is not to be feared, but faced, embraced, understood. She stood where they refused to look. So I ask you, listener, when death comes, will you cower as they trained you to, or will you meet it as a sovereign, untouchable, beyond the reach of every crown and every law? Student, we now arrive at the mechanisms that keep the machine hidden. For what good are fear, law, religion, and death as tools of control if the people ever discover the truth? This is where secrecy, surveillance, and silence become the iron walls of their fortress. Understand this. Every empire has secrets, not because truth is rare, but because truth is dangerous. In medieval courts, scribes were executed for recording events that contradicted the king's version. In churches, scrolls were burned if they offered visions of God not sanctioned by the altar. In governments, archives are sealed not for security, but to bury evidence of betrayal. Even today, documents vanish into vaults for decades, only to emerge edited, redacted, sterilized. This is not protection, it is erasure. And when secrecy is not enough, surveillance follows. You think this is new? No. Villages once employed priests and informants to report whispers, to listen for forbidden rituals, to hunt those who mourned outside of approved customs. Margaret was condemned not by law alone, but by the watching eyes of neighbors who feared her defiance. Today, surveillance is perfected, not with eyes at your window, but with devices in your pocket. Every word, every movement, every grief is measured, catalogued, stored, not to protect you, but to predict you, to mold you, to silence you before you even speak. Silence is the final weapon. Those who resist are not always executed, they are discredited, laughed at, labeled insane. History shows that ridicule is more efficient than rope. A man hanged becomes a martyr. A man mocked becomes forgotten. Margaret's fate was sealed not only in accusations of sorcery, but in whispers that she had gone mad with grief. Once the label was cast, the village no longer saw her rebellion. They saw only a deranged widow. And so they buried her story alive. Do you see the design? Secrecy hides the truth. Surveillance ensures no deviation grows unnoticed. Silence erases the rebel without creating a martyr. Together, these form the invisible fortress that has preserved control for centuries. But remember, student, cracks exist. Whispers escape. Stories survive in shadows. Margaret's defiance lived on not because it was sanctioned, but because silence is never perfect. Truth always leaks through like blood seeping beneath a locked door. The question is not whether truth survives. It always does. The question is whether you will have the courage to hear it. Student, those who approach the gates of forbidden knowledge are never left untested. Power does not simply stand aside and allow truth to be claimed. No, it tests, it breaks, it bends, it transforms. Every man or woman who dares to reach for what lies beyond the sanctioned narrative must pass through fire, and many do not emerge. The first test is ridicule. The seeker is mocked, dismissed as foolish, insane, delusional. Neighbors laugh, friends turn away, scholars sneer. This is not harmless. It is a scalpel meant to carve out your conviction. Most will crumble under the weight of scorn, retreating back into obedience. The second test is isolation. Once ridicule fails, the seeker is cut off. Old allies vanish, doors close, invitations cease. Silence wraps around them like a coffin. Loneliness gnaws at the spirit, whispering that perhaps the crowd was right, that perhaps the forbidden path was madness all along. Many abandon their search in this void of companionship. The third test is temptation. The system does not fear silencing you as much as it fears you succeeding, and so it offers rewards, status, wealth, comfort, if only you agree to step back into line. History is littered with seekers who once touched the flame of forbidden truth, only to become loyal servants of the very powers they had challenged. The final test is destruction. If all else fails, if ridicule cannot bend you, if isolation cannot break you, if temptation cannot buy you, then comes the hammer. Arrest, exile, death, for the system understands that one unbroken seeker can unravel centuries of illusions. Margaret faced this final test. She refused to be ridiculed into silence. She refused isolation by keeping her dead as companions. She refused temptation, for what could the church or crown offer her compared to the love she had already claimed? And so they destroyed her, not with rope alone, but with erasure. But here lies the paradox. Destruction is never complete. The seeker who endures even in fragments, even in whispers, transforms into something greater. The system may bury their body, but it cannot bury the contagion of their defiance. Their story becomes seed, waiting for another generation to stumble upon it, to water it with curiosity, to watch it grow. And you, listener, by hearing this, are already being tested. The question is not whether you will face the trials, it is whether you will survive them. Student, you have walked far into this labyrinth, but now you must confront a truth darker than all the rest. Awakening is not a gift, it is a burden. Once you pierce the veil, once you see the machinery of control grinding behind the painted curtains of society, you cannot return to innocence. And that, more than fear, is why most men choose chains. Freedom is not light. Freedom is weight. It crushes the shoulders of the man unprepared to carry it. To awaken is to strip yourself of illusions, and with that stripping comes loss. You lose the comfort of certainty. You lose the warmth of the crowd. You lose the soothing lies that once rocked you to sleep. Do you see? This is why most men cling to the system. They would rather be comfortable slaves than lonely sovereigns. The cost is isolation, for when you awaken, you no longer speak the language of the blind. Your words fall heavy. Your eyes carry storms. Those around you cannot follow, for they have chosen the safety of ignorance. You will be branded arrogant, unstable, dangerous. This is not punishment, it is their defense against what they cannot understand. The cost is doubt. For when you awaken, you see corruption not only in others but within yourself. You realize how deeply the chains of conditioning have sunk into your own flesh. Every thought, every memory, every desire, you must question them all. Do you know the courage it takes to dismantle even your own reflection? Few possess it. Most recoil, begging for the comfort of lies. The cost is danger, because when you awaken, you cannot be easily ruled, and rulers know this. They may tolerate a fool, they may tolerate a madman, but they cannot tolerate a man who sees clearly. For clarity is contagious, and one awakened soul can ignite thousands. And so awakening paints a mark upon your back, as surely as Margaret's defiance painted hers. This is why awakening is rare. This is why truth must be hidden, tested, broken, not because it is unreachable, but because the cost of holding it is unbearable for most. So I ask you now, listener, do you still desire the path forward, knowing the chains of illusion may never again wrap you in comfort? Or will you choose, as so many before you, to bow your head and return to the safety of sleep? Student, if you have not turned back, then hear this. Forbidden truth does not merely change what you know, it devours who you are. Identity, that fragile mask you have worn since childhood, begins to fracture. Every belief, every loyalty, every illusion you once clung to begins to burn away, leaving only raw bone beneath. And in this fire, a man discovers whether he was ever real at all. The first transformation is silence. No longer do you speak like the crowd. Their chatter about trivial things, their jokes, their comforts, they sound hollow to you like echoes in a dead room. You learn the discipline of silence because you know RDS can no longer be wasted on the deaf. Your identity shifts from belonging to withdrawal. The mask of sociability falls away. The second transformation is vision. You begin to see patterns where others see randomness. A headline is not merely news, it is instruction. A monument is not merely stone, it is ritual. A war is not merely politics, it is sacrifice. Identity is reshaped because you are no longer a passive observer. You become interpreter, reader of signs, decoder of hidden tongues. The third transformation is detachment. Once you may have been bound by pride, ambition, vanity, but the deeper you drink of forbidden truth, the more you recognize their futility. Your victories in the system are ashes, your defeats are illusions. You stand outside the cycle of reward and punishment, and in that standing you become alien to the very world that birthed you. The final transformation is sovereignty. When the illusions are gone, when the patterns are revealed, when detachment has stripped you bare, you stand as one who cannot be ruled, not because you defy authority, but because you no longer acknowledge its claim upon you. And this is the most dangerous identity of all. The world can tolerate slaves, it can tolerate rebels, but it cannot tolerate sovereigns. This is why Margaret's story was never just about death. It was about transformation. She became sovereign over her grief, sovereign over the boundary between life and death, and the system which rules by defining those boundaries could not forgive her. Her identity had slipped beyond their grasp, and that made her intolerable. Now ask yourself, listener, if forbidden truth stripped you of everything familiar, your friends, your comforts, even your name, would there be anything left of you to endure? Or would you discover you were only the mask all along? Student, never believe that the system watches passively as men awaken. No, it is a living machine, a predator, and like all predators, it has evolved methods to hunt the rare souls who slay through its nets. When you begin to awaken, you feel powerful, untouchable, but that is the very moment when the system sharpens its claws. Its counterattack does not come suddenly, it comes silently, patiently, like smoke filling a closed room. The first strike is distraction. You will be flooded with noise, scandals, entertainments, false revelations designed to exhaust your hunger for truth. Your mind will be pulled into 1,000 directions, none of which lead forward. The awakened man feels starved, chasing shadows, until he is too weary to continue. The second strike is infiltration. The system will send voices that speak your language, wear your mask, echo your suspicions. They will pretend to be fellow seekers, but their task is to guide you into dead ends. Cults, false movements, hollow conspiracies, controlled opposition meant to keep you trapped forever in circles. Many who awaken never leave these circles. They wander for decades believing they are free, when in truth they are only penned within a larger cage. The third strike is corruption. The system does not fear your truth as much as it fears your purity. It will offer you recognition, followers, wealth, power. It will tempt you to twist your vision for gain. And once you take the bargain, once you poison your truth with ambition, you are no longer dangerous. You are theirs. The final strike is erasure. If you withstand distraction, infiltration, corruption, then the system moves to silence, not always through death, though history has plenty of examples. Sometimes it is character assassination. Sometimes it is financial ruin. Sometimes it is the simple vanishing of your work, erased from records, buried so deep that only fragments survive. Margaret endured this. Her story was not destroyed by fire alone. It was dissolved in silence, smothered until only whispers remained. Understand this. Awakening is not the end of the battle. It is the beginning of war. The system knows how to reclaim those who rise. The question is whether you can recognize its counterattack before you are dragged back into its embrace. And so I ask you now, are you still standing as a seeker, or have the system's claws already begun to dig into your flesh without you even knowing? Student, never imagine you are alone in this journey. The path of forbidden truth may seem desolate, but beneath the soil runs a secret lineage, a hidden brotherhood of seekers who refuse to bow, stretching back through centuries. They are not always remembered by name, but their shadows flicker in the cracks of history, whispering to those who dare to listen. In ancient Babylon, there were scribes who smuggled forbidden symbols into clay tablets, disguising truths beneath the sanctioned myths. They knew discovery meant death, yet they carved their defiance into stone, hoping some future eye would read what was never meant to be seen. In Rome, philosophers who questioned the empire's gods were not merely punished for heresy, they were silenced because they threatened the machinery of obedience. A single question, who benefits from this lie, was enough to mark a man for execution. Yet their writings survive, hidden in fragments preserved by those who would not let them vanish. In the Middle Ages, there were alchemists who spoke in riddles not because they were fools, but because they knew the language of truth must be veiled. They buried their revelations in symbols, in the dance of fire and metal, in the language of transformation. They wore the mask of mystics, but behind their eyes burned the same flame you now glimpse. And closer still, rebels, writers, heretics, outcasts, each carried the burden of knowledge that could not be spoken aloud. They were executed, exiled, erased, yet their seeds endured. Even Margaret herself, though buried under silence, became part of this hidden lineage. Her defiance was not in books, not in speeches, but in the way she lived and died outside the chains of Tikkun, the order. You see, this lineage is not one of blood, but of fire. It binds not by family name, but by shared rebellion. Whenever a man or woman refuses to kneel to illusion, they join it. And though they may never meet, their spirits recognize one another across centuries, like sparks flaring from the same eternal flame. So when you feel alone on this path, remember, you walk with Babylon's scribes, Rome's heretics, the alchemists of Europe, and the widow of Delaware. You are not a solitary figure in the dark. You are part of an unbroken chain of defiance that no system has ever been able to fully kill. Student, we have traveled far, and now you stand at the brink. Ahead lies the abyss, the place where forbidden knowledge no longer whispers but roars. Most who reach this point retreat, trembling, for what waits beyond cannot be carried lightly. It is here that you must decide, will you descend, or will you close your eyes and pretend you never came this far? The abyss is not a place of answers. It is a place of annihilation, for to descend into it means you no longer seek to patch the holes in your worldview, you seek to burn the entire structure down. Every belief, every authority, every comfort collapses. You stare into the machinery of history and realize it was never random, never accidental. It was built, engineered, cultivated by powers that live through institutions, through symbols, through bloodlines. The abyss forces you to confront a truth no man craves. You were never free. Your choices, your values, even your rebellions were anticipated and woven into the web. You were taught to fight battles that do not matter, to rage against shadows while the true masters remain hidden behind veils. This realization is unbearable to most, for it strips away even the illusion of defiance. And deeper still, the abyss shows you your own reflection. You see not only the world's corruption, but your own complicity. How many times did you kneel without question? How many times did you repeat the script, obey the order, silence your doubt? The abyss does not simply accuse the rulers, it accuses you. And in that moment you either break or you are remade. Margaret faced this abyss. When she chose to embrace death rather than surrender her sovereignty, she descended fully. She saw through the lies of church and crown, and she would not trade that vision for life itself. That is why her story remains dangerous, because it proves a soul can face the abyss and remain whole. But listener, hear me. Once you cross this threshold, you cannot go back. The man you were will dissolve. The chains that once bound you will be visible everywhere, and there will be no rest until they are shattered, or until you are destroyed by them. So I ask you now, do you dare take the final step to look into the abyss with open eyes and allow it to strip away everything you thought you were? Student, we have walked through fire together. From the whispers in a widow's house in 1833 to the hidden lineage of seekers across ages to the very edge of the abyss itself. And now, at the end, one truth remains. Knowledge is never safe. It is never gentle. It does not comfort. It devours. Once taken into the mind, it reshapes, it corrodes, it transforms. This is the curse of forbidden truth. You cannot unknow it. Margaret's story was not simply about death nor even about rebellion. It was about a choice. She chose to live outside the chains of her time, and for that she was condemned. The system believed it destroyed her, but it did not. It only buried her seed deeper into the earth, waiting for ears like yours to hear and awaken, and now her defiance echoes through you. But beware, echo is not enough. To hear truth is one thing, to carry it, to live it, to burn for it, that is another. Most men will return to their sleep after this, clutching their illusions, whispering that the story was only story, only myth, only entertainment. But a few will not. A few will feel something burning in their chest, a call they cannot silence. For them, life will never again be the same. The question that remains is simple, but it will haunt you. Which man are you? Will you go back to your comforts, to the hollow laughter of the blind, to the soft prison of obedience? Or will you step into the cold night stripped of illusions, carrying only the fire that cannot be extinguished? The choice is yours, but know this, once chosen, it marks you forever. And so I leave you with this haunting reflection. Perhaps the screams the villagers claimed to hear in Delaware were not of the dying, but of the living, men and women crying out against their own chains, begging for release. Perhaps the widow only listened better than the rest, and in her defiance she showed what it means to hear the hidden voice of the world. Now, listener, you have heard too much to remain the same. The path splits before you. One road leads back to silence, the other into eternal unrest. Which will you walk? Which will define you? Answer that question, not to me, but to yourself. And know that in the shadows, the lineage of seekers waits to see what you decide.